Hello and welcome to another exciting journey, Lost in Brazil. If you're new here, I'm Mark, your guide through wonders of this incredible country. If you're returning, welcome back. Thank you for watching. Before we embark on this adventure, hit the subscribe button and join our community of fellow explorers. And don't forget to ring that notification bell. That way you'll be the first to know when a new adventure unfolds right here on Lost in Brazil. Today's video is a journey from Macaé, not starting there, but that's where it originated from, to this place called Lumiar. So Lumiar is part of Novo Friburgo, which is basically New Freiburg. It is a city that was settled by the Swiss, along with some others. But I'm going to read an excerpt from an older story of someone who had traveled there at one time, and she kept really good notes of it. But this was around the 1850s. I'm not sure the exact year. One way that you could find out is during the trip, she left the area to go to the coronation of Queen Isabella. So whatever time that was, whatever time frame. Of course, these trips were long, and she sort of traveled around the world, but this was one of her destinations. And I believe she chose Novo Friburgo. One is because of a waterfall. There are several waterfalls there. A couple of rivers flow in. Now, the route that I'm taking is I'm going up along the Rio Macaé. Now that comes out about 3 hours from the city of Rio de Janeiro. Now her trip goes up a different river that starts at Rio de Janeiro and goes up the river. So you can imagine back in those days how long this trek would be. And it's about halfway between Macaé and Rio, I would say, somewhere around there. So it probably took a few days, and it was probably some rough terrain too. But anyway, just talk about what you're going to see. You're going to see a lot of really beautiful landscapes, lush forests, and other things. So while this area can get a little bit cool in the wintertime, it doesn't get excessively cold, so it's still like a subtropical area. It's not fully tropical. It's close to it, but not quite there. So, like one example is if you go swimming in the river, it's going to be cold, and it's a great place to dip and get refreshed. Now, if you go in the wintertime, it'll probably be too cold to be comfortable. I mean, it depends on your it's a good place to dip to really cool down, but it's going to be excessively cold. Even in the summertime, it's cold when it's in the 90s. Now, so we're going through this forested area, really, really beautiful, well-kept area. It's in a place. It seems like the culture there is really focused on maintaining the roads. Everything's pretty nice around there. You'll see, like when we get the roads are going to be bad, but once the roads start getting good, that's when we cross into the area that belongs to Novo Friburgo. So, but other than that, like outside of it, the roads were bad, full of potholes, difficult travel. But once we crossed over there, the only part of the road that was bad was where they were doing road construction. And you'll see that as we go through. Now, going back to the culture, it's a really nice place to visit. It's beautiful. The place Lumiar, a lot of tourists go there. It's a nice little, quaint little city with lots of nice restaurants, tourism. A lot of people go there to go to the waterfalls. They have four-wheel drive buses, sort of like, basically pickup trucks. I think they're Toyota pickup trucks that are converted in the back, and I think there's probably seating for like maybe 8 people or something, maybe more, a little bit more, not much, but it's it's a protected seating. It's with roll bars and things like that, so they can go traveling in the rough terrain. And I haven't heard of anybody having any accidents with that, so it seems like a pretty good way to travel and good sights to see. So a lot of people go there for the waterfalls, maybe the restaurants. They have restaurants, bars, things like that. So it's a nice little area. Now and this is Lumiar, which is part of Novo Friburgo. Now if you go into like the center of Novo Friburgo, it's a nice place to visit too. A lot of shops. It has a fairly good sized population. I don't know what it is. I would say somewhere like maybe a couple 100,000, maybe something like that. It's not a metropolitan, but it's not a podunk either. And it's pretty nice. I've been there a couple times. It's not going to happen in this video, but you'll see some places that are part of it. It's more rural, the area that I'm going to be in, but it's still nice to see. So if you go into like Novo Friburgo, they have chocolate factories there, cheese factories, make good quality stuff. And there's in like one of the chocolate factories there. It sells a lot of different things that are the traditional foods of Switzerland, and like German type food or Germanic type food. But when you go there, you will see a huge statue of William Tell, and I'll put that in one of my videos somewhere. And it's interesting. So the culture is basically identifies with William Tell, and you'll see a lot of that in Brazil. This identity with that type of a culture here, because people, it's a frontier, and there are people still living in places that are difficult to access. So they're sort of out of the net. You have a lot of I don't know. There's some like homesteading going on still. It still happens. Like in one of my videos, the first video I posted, I'm going through a neighborhood that's I didn't mention the word homesteading, but basically that's what they did. They homesteaded there. And I think there's certain laws that sort of protect that in Brazil. And so a lot of people are settled in some of these rural areas that are hard to reach. And a lot of them just recently became connected to civilization. So it's an interesting culture. So it's a very, it can be a very wild culture sometimes. But people are friendly, people are nice, and it's a very nice road to follow. Now, so we're not going to be driving through any major cities, but I will do that in the future. I'll post some videos that when I do go through a major city, and I might post a video of the last time that I went to Rio and drove around through there. It's a little bit crazy, but I think you can see a little bit of Rio, what the driving conditions are like. Now, as I mentioned before, the roads are going to be bad through part of the trip. Now, one of the things that's interesting is that, the main highway to get there, it's the main highway that goes across the state of Rio de Janeiro. It's actually a private highway. Now, you think, well, Brazil, it's kind of leans towards socialism and things like that. And the thing is that it's hard to, you cannot really compare Brazil to the United States. So one of the things to take into consideration is that when you have an economy that's heavily regulated by the government, which the government is very inefficient, because there's no motive for them to make money. So what they do is try to reduce their services in order to increase revenue, rather than trying to increase service, because they don't sell things, they just take money. So they're limited on the amount of money that they could take, resources that they can take from the people, and so they reduce services. So as services get reduced, people have no other option than to take it into their own hands, and you see a lot of that happening in Brazil. So there are a lot of markets that extend outside of the market. Now these roads, these private roads, don't extend out of the market, but I guess, out of necessity, there was no other option. So you have these. This is a private highway, so you have to go through toll roads, which, in the first time that I went through through a toll road, I thought it was absurd that I had to pay to drive down a road, because I'd never seen one before. But in reality, I think it's actually a better idea, because if you don't take the road, you don't have to pay taxes for it. Therefore, it's a private road. So when you drive down this private road, it also motivates them to make it better. So the road isn't too bad. I mean, it's pretty good when you go through the toll area, and it's not bad at all. It's actually I haven't seen any major problems. One time I took a route in southern Brazil going up to Sao Paulo and hit a huge pothole and had a blowout. I mean, there were potholes everywhere. I was dodging them as I went up the road. So there are some cultural things that affect this thing. So you're going back to cultural highlights, the road conditions, the driving. Everybody talks about the driving, but it's not too bad until you get into Rio, into Sao Paulo. People are driving crazy because of the traffic. I guess everybody's on the edge of road rage in those places. But other than that, it's not too bad. It does, you do see some things that you won't see in the U.S. because the police don't pull people over in Brazil. That's one thing. At least, I mean, you probably have to do something really bad to get pulled over by the police, but I have never seen it. I've seen some crazy things go by the police, and they're interested in other things. I think they feel like their job is to fight crime and not stop people because they don't like the way that they drive. So, I don't know what the percentage of accidents are compared to the U.S., but I don't see a lot of accidents on the road. I mean, I do from time to time, maybe more like motorcycle accidents, but to be honest, I don't really recall any, maybe one or two accidents, through I don't know, thousands of hours of driving. I haven't seen a lot recently. So the road conditions in some places can be really bad, while in others it can be quite good. And in my recent video before this, I had to go down a dirt road, and for a dirt road, it wasn't too bad, but I did hit one place where it scraped the bottom of my car going through there. So it isn't it's not that great. Of course, it's sort of a rough ride. And so you go to this culture now. Now you might think, oh, things are, terrible down in Brazil, but sometimes people have this illusion, and especially Brazilians, there's so much marketing for immigration to the United States that they think it's some sort of Shangri-La or some perfected utopia in the United States. And some things, like for example, I don't know, the best washing machine that I ever had, I bought here in Brazil. The best refrigerator I think I've ever had was down here in Brazil. And some of these items, they seem to last forever. And if you need something fixed, maintenance, there are a lot of people around here, at least where I live, there are a lot of people around here that will do a good service for a good price, and they're very quick about responding. And so I have nothing but praise for the quality of workmanship that I've seen within this city. Of course, they're like, I had one guy, he tried to fix like an older refrigerator for someone that I know, and he tried a couple of times, couldn't do it, but he returned the money. So there's always always something. No one's perfect. And I think they're like I went to my automobile mechanic. He's excellent. And I remember one time like he was extremely busy, so I went to another guy, and there was like one car in his garage. And when I showed up, he went to lunch, and he said he would be back. And I was like, nope, I'm not going to do this one. I went back to the other guy, and I just left in my car and waited about 4 or 5 days for him to fix it. And I left like about $50 in my dashboard. And when I got back, he told me, he said, hey, you had money in your dashboard. So I was like, okay, thanks for letting me know. And I didn't, I realized that I left the money there after I dropped off the car. And I thought, well, I guess I'll see how honesty is. So, of course, you're going to probably encounter that in the U.S. too. I mean, it's not, he has like about 4 or 5 young boys working for him, maybe in their teens to 20s. So he has a pretty honest shop. And there's been a couple times where I've dropped money in Brazil. Like one time, like I usually leave wads of money in my pocket, and sometimes I'll drop something here and there, or at least I have a couple of times. And both times some kid or somebody would pick the money up and come running and say, "Hey, you dropped some money." So a lot of people have these negative stories about Brazil, and I guess like I was told, if you go to the Copacabana, don't wear a watch, or don't wear any kind of jewelry, anything like that. And that's probably true there, because I mean that's a tourist area. But I was in Hamburg, Germany one time. Somebody tried to rob me there, and several panhandlers came up to me. So, I never, like one time I was in on the Copacabana, and I was talking to this German guy, and probably somebody heard us speak in German, so he probably, they like to target German tourists for some reason. I think because, it used to be that Germans were very naive, because they just don't have a lot of this stuff going on there. I lived in Germany for 3 years, and, for the most part, you don't have to worry about anything in most of these places. It's fairly crime-free. I don't know about today, but like back then, this was in the 90s. It was virtually crime-free. Now, when I was talking to him, some guy was riding by on a bicycle, and I could see that look in his eyes. So I just sort of glanced at him, and he had this like wide eye in his look. Some of you might know what I'm talking about. And so he rode around. He just went by, and then like maybe about a minute later, he rides up behind this German. And he's taking the little knob off of his bicycle wheel, or the tire, the inflator thing, the nozzle connector. I can't think of what it's called at the moment. But anyway, he was pulling the cap off of that, and, acting like he dropped it, or something. I think he's trying to flip it like over on the table or something. Because what happened was, while he was passing by, this German was sticking some money in his shirt pocket. So, I just told him Achtung, and basically means watch out. And he immediately grabbed his shirt pocket, and this guy fled off on his bicycle. So, but where I live, I'd say it's fairly safe. Of course, there's you have to watch out in certain places, but if you live in Brazil, you have to be careful. You have to be careful anywhere, but there's some, things to say down here. There's Brazilians are usually, have some methods to being safe, and of course they don't always follow them, because you always hear of somebody talking on their cell phone on the road, and somebody flies by on a motorcycle and grabs it out of their hand. But where I'm at, I would say the crime here is far less than maybe somewhere like Atlanta. Definitely less than Chicago, crime per capita. And less than Los Angeles, California, New York, any place like that. So we have nothing like that where I'm at here. So you can come down to a place like this and feel very safe. And there's some nice beaches around here too. I live close to the beach, but a lot of people that live in Rio, they come to this place called Rio dos Ostros, means oyster river or river of oysters. And I know several Brazilians that live in Rio, and they come to this place to for the weekends to escape Rio. Like even during Carnival, I know a couple people that are going to come down around here to go to the beach, and there's some really nice beaches to the south of where I'm at. So it's a great place to vacation. It's very safe. I mean, I don't know. I can't really give any kind of statistics, but it's a good place to go and to relax. And of course, nothing's 100%. So like when you go to anywhere, like especially a tourist area, you shouldn't have expensive jewelry on. You shouldn't have expensive watches. You shouldn't have your wallet, in a place where somebody can pickpocket you and things like that. Most people usually put their wallet in their front pocket. Like even like the jeans made down here in Brazil, the back pockets are useless because no one uses them. So you don't have people with walking around wallets in their back pocket. They're always in their side pocket, or they have something else that's less conspicuous. I actually don't carry a wallet anymore. Maybe that's sort of a thing of the past, especially when you take into consideration everything's done electronically. So I talked about the road conditions. Like the town where I'm at, the roads are getting better. They're improving. They could get better, but I think one of the things that they realized is they're losing people, so they have to make the roads better. And talking about the local cuisine, one thing to definitely mention is that here, well, one thing, this local area, they do not like spicy food. So you're looking at a Germanic, Italian culture, maybe a little bit of Portuguese culture. And while there's always this idea that anything Latin is spiced up, well, it's not necessarily true. You go to Argentina, I don't think they're big into spices. I think the spicy thing was more of a Mexican culture. You have the Maya, Aztec, whoever modified all that food. I think that's where a lot of that culture comes from. So when you get down to places like this, it's not spicy at all. You have a lot of German dishes, a lot of barbecue, a lot of the, if you go to somewhere like Fogo de Chão in the United States, where they walk around with like a sword looking thing and they carve the meat off in your plate. They have a lot of places like that. Now, not all of them walk around and carve the meat off into your plate. Very, very few of them do, but a lot of them are grilling the meat on a grill on one of those things, and then they just pull them off and cut it up and put it into your plate, or they, but that's usually the traditional way that they do it. That way they can rotate it and so forth. But some of the places will carve it off, and it depends. You see more of that like in the southern part of Brazil, but there's a lot of barbecue here, a lot of that, and that's probably the like grilled beef. That's the main thing that you're going to get. Steak. So this area right here is the part of Rio is the part of Rio that has the highest number of head of cattle per capita. So the food it's good. You can buy spices. You can get, they have some good peppers down here. They're pretty good, but you will not be able to find so you cannot find anything Mexican around here. It's just completely void of anything Mexican. So you might be able to, like, you can find some, like if you go to some of the stores, you can find Tabasco sauce, you can find, different types of barbecue sauce, and anything that's really popular in the United States is sort of imported down here or copied down here, and it's pretty good. It's not, so you can definitely get spices. They had red peppers down here, black pepper. Now, if you go to a restaurant, you're going to have salt, but they usually don't have salt shakers. And one of the reasons why is because, like in the United States, they put sort of this aluminum oxide, I believe, or something like that in your salt in the United States to keep it from clogging or clogging together. And, it keeps it like loose and fine, so when you shake the salt, it's coming out fine. But down here in Brazil, I don't think they put that in the salt, and also with the humidity, the salt sort of clumps up a little bit, so it doesn't really work in a shaker too well. So you usually have like these little paper things, like certain restaurants, and that's what they have. Now, they don't have black pepper in restaurants. You could buy it in the store, but they don't have it in the restaurant. So if you go to a restaurant, you're going to have salt, ketchup, mustard, and mayonnaise a lot of times, and that's usually what they have. They might have some hot sauce, and you can probably ask for anything else. They probably have it somewhere in the back. And it's pretty good. Pizzas are okay down here. They're different. They're different from the United States, but they're good. It's like, I think it's just a matter of taste, because if you talk to a Brazilian, especially from Sao Paulo, they will swear that there's no pizza in the world as good as what they call the Paulista pizza. But, of course, if you go to New York, they're going to swear that their pizza is the best. And if from what I've seen, if a Brazilian eats a New York pizza, they don't think it's that good, vice versa. It could be just arrogance and not wanting to admit this. Now, wildlife encounters. There's a lot of wildlife around here, but it's difficult to find. You'll see a lot of birds. You'll see domesticated animals everywhere. But that's about it. So I think one of the reasons why you see so many animals in the United States compared to Brazil is because in the United States you have the societies that have been developed by hunters in order to manage, wildlife management. And this wildlife management is effective because you can study the pattern of wildlife, and if you leave animals without a means of thinning out the herd, like for example, they put wolves in, I think, Yosemite or one of those major parks, because they had really a problem with the whole ecosystem, and after they put the wolves in there, it kept everything at a good level. So there's this wildlife management in the U.S., and it's very effective. They don't have it down here in Brazil, and I think you have a serious shortage of wildlife. This is an area where there should be alligators, but I have not seen an alligator here. I heard they exist, but it's a very rare sighting. And so if you have these animals that are, that are at a low population, that means they have plenty of forest area to hide. So they're going to stay away from people as much as possible. So in the United States, you have this increase of animals, and I imagine they have no other choice but to go into the neighborhoods to eat. They would probably rather not, but once they eat everything in their ecosystem, they will venture into the cities and risk the fear of humans. To risk and encounter the fear of humans. Can't think of a better way to say that, but you know what I mean. And going into the city, and eating your lawn or whatever it might be, and then they realize, well, hey, these guys aren't going to hurt me, or maybe until they see the headlights and it's too late then. So that could be that's sort of my theory on that, because I've just been curious about why it is like that, and I haven't seen it. Now there are, like, if you go to a park here, you have to, or at least one of the parks that I went to, you have to be escorted by a ranger. And the reason why he told me, he said there's a lot of aggressive snakes that will chase you, and aggressive spiders that, like in Brazil, they have this spider that's very aggressive and very venomous, and snakes are venomous and aggressive as well. I don't know if you'd say poisonous. I guess you'd say venomous for a spider as well. I know you say venomous for a snake. If I'm incorrect, one of you biologists out there, correct me. And so you do have a lot of dangerous animals. There's also pumas or jaguars running around in the forest. You also have, I think, panthers down here as well. But they're less aggressive, like they are in the United States. So the pumas are very if you see a puma, like, they have an expression down here, I think they use it with the military too, and it's basically the jaguar will drink water, the puma will drink water, something like that. And it's basically saying, like, if you see a cat, one of those wild cats drinking water, something's wrong, because they're very reclusive, and there's something going on if you see one. So they might be around the forest, but you don't see them. Now they are very aggressive, and you go walking in the forest, they will attack. If you're in their territory. I saw a video of a guy that started following puma tracks. I can't think if it's a puma or jaguar. Like in Portuguese, it's a different word. But anyway, he was following the tracks, and then he's like filming this, and he's all happy about it. But then he gets to this place, and he's standing there with his camera. He's doing like a selfie with his camera, and he sees the puma crunch down behind him, like he's about to jump, and he takes off running. And then the next picture is him in the hospital, getting with scars all over his head and neck, getting stitched up. So, it's something not to play around with. These people doing selfies in front of buffaloes and things, and bears. Black bears in the United States are completely, crazy. You shouldn't play around with wildlife. It's a dangerous thing. So the local people, they're very nice. Very, very traditional. Sometimes you have all kinds, but I would say there's a lot of, you see a lot more of the traditional things. Now in the city, in Macaé, you get a lot of people from the Northeast, so it's a different culture. But when you go into these mountains and other places, it is it's extremely similar to rural American culture. It's excessively similar. There's some minor differences, but you see the sometimes you might see people riding horses with cowboy hats. They're not always, usually when somebody's riding a horse, they might have a John Deere cap on, or a Texas Longhorn hat on their baseball cap or something, riding on the horse, wearing sneakers and jeans and a t-shirt. So usually the cowboy hat, cowboy boots are at the rodeos and stuff, but even then, when you see them practicing, they're not necessarily wearing that. So, but I would, they're like, one time I went to a barbecue, and we were in like these typical barbecue shelters, just like you have at a park in the U.S. And they were there frying fish, just like you would fry, just the way you'd fry it in the U.S. and grilling steak and other things. And I just kind of looked around and thought, if I heard, I mean, they would play like Brazilian country music and American country music, go back and forth. So they were playing American country music, and I was looking around and said, well, if they weren't playing soccer, I would swear that I'm in the U.S. I mean, I'm out in this place where there's red clay, and it wasn't so hot, and it just looked like the red clay in Alabama or something. And I thought, well, this is really close. So you'll see a lot of that. There's a lot of the culture. So of course, when the European cultures came over, they sort of maintained that culture just like they did in the U.S. And you have a lot of the culture in the U.S. It's not just British, but you have Germanic, African culture. Everything sort of mixed together in the U.S. just like it did in Brazil. So very, very similar. And so, of course, being safe in Brazil, you should, you shouldn't go just off anywhere. It's probably a good idea to do something with a local. Unless you have experience. I wouldn't tell you, like somebody that's never been to Brazil or never been abroad, to just venture off on your own, because it can be risky. I would say that the likelihood of something happening would be 1,000,000 to 1, but you never know, and you don't want to take that risk. So you really need to do your research before you come down here. I go to a lot of different places, and I do a lot of different things that most people would never do. People like to go to the tourist areas, but I've been to a lot of places before. I have a lot of experience. I've had a lot of training, on what to do and how to, blend in with the environment. A lot of this type of training in the past. So it still could be dangerous for me, and sometimes I have to really do an assessment before I go into some of these places just to make sure that it's going to be okay. But I have a lot of people, a lot of friends down here, friends that are Brazilian Navy SEALs that give me information on what to do and what not to do down here. So I'll listen to them and take advice from them. And, so people that are a phone call away that can help me out. So I kind of have a plan on what to do. But that's basically it. That's something to think about, is that you have to know what you're getting into and understand it. So hidden things around here, if you want to get off the beaten path, which is what I do a lot of, there are lots of things to see. And the best thing to do is I don't know, you could Google it, talk to people, ask questions, feel your way around, and do your research on it. But there are waterfalls around here. A lot of things are going to be better known by the locals. So you ask the locals. If you talk to a travel agency, what they're going to do is they're going to take you to the most expensive places that may or may not be that great, because they make their money not only by the fees that you pay them, but they also get paid by other people to take you to their hotels, to take you to their shops. So I went to a duty-free place in Argentina, and I had no, somebody said, we need to go to the duty-free. We need to go there. And I'm like, okay. So finally went there, and they had some good things. Like there was this black tea that I could not find anywhere, and it was really good, but it was expensive as can be. So you might not have to pay duties on it, but you're going to pay double the price anyway. It's going to be higher than if you buy taxed items. And so it was a place to get some, I guess, really wanted international, things that were wanted internationally. But it really wasn't worth it. But you had to, when you went in the place, the travel agent was there. They said, hey, you get a discount if you register us, as the person that took you there. So, of course, the reason why this was happening is, and they were very, excited to make sure we got our discount, which we probably could have negotiated that anyway, because I'm sure they were huge, clearing a huge margin on that. But the reason why they were doing that, and they were extremely preoccupied with that, was because the code that we gave them was the way they made their revenue too. And we would take them to various places, and they were there to make sure that we got signed in as a tourist group in order so that they could make their money. So they're going to take you to the places that pay them the most. And whether it's good or not, I don't know, but you're not going to go to these like hidden areas that are really good. So you have to get to know the locals and other things to find some of these hidden gems, which in my opinion are much better than going to a crowded tourist area. Now, I went to the Statue of Christ, which is also known as the Corcovado. It's that big statue of Christ with the arms open, and it's definitely a sight worth seeing. And I went there with a local that knew the area well, so when I went there, it wasn't crowded at all, and we seemed to find the best times to go. But the majority of time, it's like completely crowded, and you're like in a line of people trying to walk up these stairs waiting to go there. So you might spend all day to spend a little bit of time in this huge crowd of people. And when I went there, it was nice. So if you could find the best time to go, that's also good. But that's fine. Go there. Go to the Sugarloaf. See those things. Those are fine. But I think when I went, it wasn't so bad. And the people that I was with, they knew the best time to go. And they weren't tourist agencies. And when I got out of there, there were these taxi drivers wanting like $50. I don't know if it's 50 reals or $50, but they were wanting way more than it should cost to go from the Sugarloaf up to the Corcovado. And I just asked them, I said, well, how much is it? And they gave me this huge price because they heard my accent. And just curiosity, because I already had a ride. But it's good to see those places, at least one time. But most of the Brazilians that live in Rio, they never go to those places. I know a lot of Brazilians from there that I do business with all the time. Most of them, from my statistical data of the few that I've spoken with, I would say 80% of them have never been up to the Statue of Christ, have never been on the Sugarloaf, and most of the tourist areas. And they usually go to other places. So a lot of these other places are actually nicer, but they're off the beaten path, and you would enjoy them much more. And I mean, if you're curious about it, I don't mind answering questions. So if you want to ask me about it, comment in below, and I will do my best to respond. I'll give some ideas. I don't know if anybody's that interested in it, but if you go to Brazil, you need to go to these other places, much more than those tourist areas. Beautiful waterfalls. I mean, it's nice. And when you go there are only going to be a few locals around, and you're not going to be there with a massive crowd of people. And that's one of the things that's really, really nice about it. And the final thing is that I think, you should always do your research. Security is important. So safety and security, you need to make sure that you do things. If you don't know anybody, if you don't have anyone you know personally, you need to make sure that you use a respectable agency or something like that to do it, because there are a lot of people in this world that will take advantage of you. And if you just talk to some random person and say, hey, I'd like some help, they'll say, yeah, I'd be glad to. and you end up getting, you know, because like for one thing, you know, maybe someone is thinking, hey, this guy might pay, you know, like they might think all Americans are rich, so this guy might pay me a lot of money. And then when you get down there, you know, you sort of had a miscommunication, and their idea of a lot of money is different from yours. And you know, some people don't have the concept of the value of things, so they might think it's like, you know, 10,000 bucks to spend a day with you, which, you know, in reality it would be like maybe 500. Well, you know, maybe a 100 or 200 bucks down here. You know, you could probably get a chaperone, you know, that's for, you know, maybe $100 a day at less, maybe, you know. But the thing is the person going to be reliable, and that's the problem. Now, like if you get maybe an Uber down here, you know, or somebody to drive you, you might be able to get somebody to drive you for a couple of $100 a day. You know, it might be somewhere around there. If you know, it maybe, you know, Uber might even be less, but you know, probably a best option is to use an Uber, which they have down here. And you know, or you could do, you might be able to do something through an agency and say, okay, this is where I want to go, and specify. You know, I don't know, but I can tell you like some of the good places to go to. And you can also rent a car in Brazil. I rented a car one time, and you know, I showed up, rented a car, drove around everywhere, and had no problem. GPSs work fine down here, so you could do it on your own. You just have to be careful of, you know, where not to go to, and like if you say, for example, if you arrive at the airport, like in Rio or wherever it might be, you know, plug in. I wouldn't stay in Rio. I would go maybe directly to somewhere like Novo Friburgo or some of these places. There are a lot of hotels and guest houses, and you know, these bed and breakfasts everywhere. So you could find a place, especially in Novo Friburgo, and you know, go stay at one of those places, and it would be good. And if you're using a GPS in somewhere like Novo Friburgo, the possibility of you going through some dangerous places is going to be, I would say, zilch. So, but in Rio, there are stories about people, a GPS sending them into a favela, and you know, really bad things happening. Like one time, I was actually in Rio, and I was using Waze, and the Waze just started acting up, and I didn't want to like restart my cell phone while we were driving, but I finally had to do it. But it took us into something that looked like a favela. I'm not sure where I was at because the GPS was so messed up. It was like sending us to some crazy places, and I had to reboot my phone, and then everything was back to normal. So you need to be, but it's also because, you know, I'd been using it all day, and you know, probably, I don't know what happened, but it was sort of weird. Now, if you want to know some, you know, history about it, like in the past, you know, especially Brazil, there's a book by Teddy Roosevelt. He went to Brazil, traveled around through the Amazon. It's pretty interesting what he did. And I think this was after he was president too. He seemed like he was quite a bit of an explorer. Now there was another person. Her name was Ida Pfeiffer. And she was I think she was German or Austrian or something. And I have to go back and look at her history. But she traveled down to Brazil, and her main objective was to go to Rio dos Ostros. But she had, you know, it was difficult for her to get there. I mean, not Rio dos Ostros, but to go to Novo Friburgo. So she had a lot of difficulty getting there because of the conditions. But she finally made it, got there, and it was it seemed to work out pretty good. But she got there. There were what she was talking about. There were a lot of interesting people there. A lot of scientists, um, biologists, people working in those types of fields were living around in the area. So there were some there was a lot of interesting people down there, according to her. I'm not going to go into detail of everything. I read this before in the past. I'm looking at a couple things that I jotted down. But back then it was a small town. It had, according to her, it had this wide street in the middle, but the houses were sort of scattered around out in other places. So when I went down there, there was like a wide road that went through the middle, but in the middle of the area, it had a kind of like a park in there, and then there were roads on each side of it. So that might have been the area, and they might have just sort of built a park in the middle of it. And it was interesting. There were like little shops on the walkway. It was kind of nice there. A lot of nice shops. A good country club there. It was really nice. But she had a lot of difficulty getting there, getting back, because for health reasons, and of another person, health problems with another person that had an injury and an infection, and then trying to travel up and down the rivers. It seemed like a difficult trek. So, they were at Petropolis. That's another interesting place to see. Petropolis, Novo Friburgo. Petropolis is where the king used to be. So, it has some interesting features there. It's nice. It's kind of a colder area, but it's a nice place. So then, like, if you go into like Theodore Roosevelt, it's also a very interesting story. And I read that story once, but Theodore Roosevelt went in there when there were no maps of parts of Brazil, of the backside of Brazil or the west side of Brazil. So they went up the Amazon, and then they went through this area that was unmapped. So they went through there for the first time with a small group of people. And whoever was navigating, he must have been really, really good at it. He was Brazilian, I believe, and in the Brazilian military. And when they got through this one part, they were on this river, and there was this one guy that shot another guy. I'm not sure what the reason was. I would have to go back and look through it. So it's an interesting book to read. And I think Roosevelt, or at least somebody there, they wanted to. Well, I think Roosevelt might have asked the captain that was in charge of the expedition why he doesn't arrest him, and he said, because if we do, that means we're going to have to have people guarding him. It's a risk. It's going to take like extra resources to keep this guy guarded. So they just decided to let him go. I think he might have like maintained a distance to fall back, because I think they got him at the end. I'm not sure. I have to go back and read that again. But I know they had encounters with him more than once, but he had killed the guy on the expedition, and they were in such an isolated place, it just wasn't worth it, because I think some people had died already, and it was a rough situation. But it's pretty amazing that they would go up the Amazon and then back down. I think it was the Paraná River, the river that goes through Iguaçu, I believe, around through those areas, and it's amazing that they were able to navigate all that. That he would actually do that after he was, I believe it was after he was president. And so, and there's some other interesting stories too, and I'll talk about those in the future. I don't want to spend too much time going over these now, but I might add some of these stories into this. If anybody's interested, like maybe in one of these videos, you could watch the scenery of Brazil and listen to a story about, I don't know, some Brazilian literature or something like that. This from an audiobook like LibriVox or something. I was thinking about doing that to give some entertainment and some information about Brazil that would possibly be better said than what I could say on here. So that's it. And if you like what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe. I definitely would like to have better material. So any recommendations or anyone who wants to hear about certain thing, because of course I'm doing this video to gather an audience. I mean, that's my objective here, to get an audience, to get people to listen, to find things that people like, just to talk about it. I mean, I initially started doing this to share my ideas, and I like sharing my ideas. It wouldn't matter if it's with one person or 100. I'm not motivated to have a big group of people, but if I could tell my stories to larger groups of people, that would be great too. It wouldn't bother me at all. So anyway, everybody have a great day, night, whatever it is, wherever you're at when you're listening to this. And thank you so much for listening. And make sure that you subscribe. Click that bell to get more. If you liked it, give me a thumbs up. That would definitely help. And click the notification bell to get notifications, because I will have future videos, and I'm going to try to get better and better. I'm getting a feel of what people want to listen to. I'm doing my research and what they want to see and what you want to see, and I'm going to go in further and further and try to get better things in places where no one has ever really gone before, as far as making videos. Because most people are making videos on the Copacabana or all these major places where everybody goes. And that's fine, but I want to hit these places that no one has ever seen. Because I've been to a lot of these places in the past, and I tell people about them, and they have no idea what I'm talking about because they didn't see it. So now I can actually provide details of what I did see. So thank you very much for watching, and take care. And until next time, see you soon. And as they say in Brazil, obrigado, which means obliged. So they might say muito obrigado, which means much obliged. And that's basically what it means. Obrigado means obliged, just like the Texans do. So these cowboys down here, I would say. Anyway, take care and see you soon. So now I'm going to finish things off with the story of the Brazilian cat. I think you'll like it.
The Brazilian Cat by Arthur Conan Doyle. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Bologna Times. The Brazilian Cat by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. It is hard luck on a young fellow to have expensive tastes, great expectations, aristocratic connections, but no actual money in his pocket, and no profession by which he may earn any. The fact was that my father, a good, sanguine, easy-going man, had such confidence in the wealth and benevolence of his bachelor elder brother, Lord Southerton, that he took it for granted that I, his only son, would never be called upon to earn a living for myself. He imagined that if there were not a vacancy for me on the great Southerton estates, at least there would be found some post in that diplomatic service which still remains the special preserve of our privileged classes. He died too early to realize how false his calculations had been. Neither my uncle nor the state took the slightest notice of me, or showed any interest in my career. An occasional brace of pheasants or basket of hares was all that ever reached me to remind me that I was heir to the Otwell house and one of the richest estates in the country. In the meantime I found myself a bachelor and man about town, living in a suite of apartments in Grosvenor Mansions, with no occupation save that of pigeon shooting and polo playing at Hurlingham. Month by month I realized that it was more and more difficult to get the brokers to renew my bills, or to cash any further post obits upon an unentailed property. Ruin lay right across my path, and every day I saw it clearer, nearer, and more absolutely unavoidable. What made me feel my own poverty the more was that, apart from the great wealth of Lord Southerton, all my other relations were fairly well to do. The nearest of these was Everard King, my father's nephew and my own first cousin, who had spent an adventurous life in Brazil and had now returned to the country to settle down on his fortune. We never knew how he made his money, for he bought the estate of Greylands, near Clipton on the Marsh, in Suffolk. For the first year of his residence in England he took no more notice of me than my miserly uncle, but at last one summer morning, to my very great relief and joy, I received a letter asking me to come down that very day and spend a short visit at Greylands Court. I was expecting a rather long visit to Bankruptcy Court at the time, and this interruption seemed almost providential. If I only could get on terms with this unknown relative of mine, I might pull through yet. For the family credit, he could not let me go entirely to the wall. I ordered my valet to pack my valise, and I set off the same evening for Clipton on the Marsh. After changing at Ipswich, a little local train deposited me at a small deserted station lying amidst a rolling grassy country, with a sluggish and winding river curving in and out amidst the valleys between high silted banks, which showed that we were within reach of the tide. No carriage was waiting me. I found afterwards that my telegram had been delayed. So I hired a dog cart at the local inn. The driver, an excellent fellow, was full of my relative's praises, and I learned from him that Mr. Everard King was already a name to conjure with in that part of the county. He had entertained the school children, he had thrown his grounds open to visitors, he had subscribed to charities. In short, his benevolence had been so universal that my driver could only account for it on the supposition that he had parliamentary ambitions. My attention was drawn away from my driver's panegyric by the appearance of a very beautiful bird which settled on a telegraph post beside the road. At first I thought that it was a jay, but it was larger, with a brighter plumage. The driver accounted for its presence at once by saying that it belonged to the very man whom we were about to visit. It seems that the acclimatization of foreign creatures was one of his hobbies, and that he had brought with him from Brazil a number of birds and beasts which he was endeavouring to rear in England. When once we had passed the gates of Greylands Park, we had ample evidence of this taste of his. Some small spotted deer, a curious wild pig known, I believe, as a peccary, a gorgeously feathered oriole, some sort of armadillo, and a singular lumbering, end-toed beast like a very fat badger, were among the creatures which I observed as we drove along the winding avenue. Mr. Everard King, my unknown cousin, was standing in person upon the steps of his house, for he had seen us in the distance, and guessed that it was I. His appearance was very homely and benevolent, short and stout, 45 years old, perhaps, with a round, good-humoured face, burned brown with the tropical sun, and shot with 1,000 wrinkles. He wore white linen clothes, in true planter style, with a cigar between his lips, and a large Panama hat upon the back of his head. It was such a figure as one associates with a verandahed bungalow, and it looked curiously out of place, of this broad stone English mansion, with its solid wings and its Palladio pillars before the doorway. "My dear," he cried, glancing over his shoulder, "my dear, here is our guest. Welcome, welcome to Greylands. I am delighted to make your acquaintance, Cousin Marshall, and I take it as a great compliment that you should honor this sleepy little country place with your presence." Nothing could be more hearty than his manner, and he set me at my ease in an instant. But it needed all his cordiality to atone for the frigidity and even rudeness of his wife, a tall, haggard woman, who came forward at his summons. She was, I believe, of Brazilian extraction, though she spoke excellent English, and I excused her manners on the score of her ignorance of our customs. She did not attempt to conceal, however, either then or afterwards, that I was no very welcome visitor at Greylands Court. Her actual words were, as a rule, courteous, but she was the possessor of a pair of particularly expressive dark eyes, and I read in them very clearly from the first that she heartily wished me back in London once more. However, my debts were too pressing, and my designs upon my wealthy relative were too vital for me to allow them to be upset by the ill temper of his wife, so I disregarded her coldness and reciprocated the extreme cordiality of his welcome. No pains had been spared by him to make me comfortable. My room was a charming one. He implored to tell him anything which could add to my happiness. It was on the tip of my tongue to inform him that a blank cheque would materially help towards that end, but I felt that it might be premature in the present state of our acquaintance. The dinner was excellent, and as we sat together afterwards over his Havanas and coffee, which later he told me was specially prepared upon his own plantation, it seemed to me that all my driver's eulogies were justified, and that I had never met a more large-hearted and hospitable man. But, in spite of his cheery and good nature, he was a man with a strong will and a fiery temper of his own. Of this I had an example upon the following morning. The curious aversion which Mrs. Everard King had conceived towards me was so strong, that her manner at breakfast was almost offensive. But her meaning became unmistakable when her husband had quitted the room. "The best train in the day is at 12:15, said she. "But I was not thinking of going to-day," I answered frankly, perhaps even defiantly, for I was determined not to be driven out by this woman. "Oh, if it rests with you," said she, and stopped with a most insolent expression in her eyes. "I am sure," I answered, "that Mr. Everard King would tell me if I were outstaying my welcome." "What's this? What's this?" said a voice, and there he was in the room. He had overheard my last words, and a glance at our faces had told him the rest. In an instant his chubby, cheery face set into an expression of absolute ferocity. "Might I trouble you to walk outside, Marshall?" said he. I may mention that my own name is Marshall King. He closed the door behind me, and then, for an instant, I heard him talking in a low voice of concentrated passion to his wife. This gross breach of hospitality had evidently hit upon his tenderest point. I am no eavesdropper, so I walked out on to the lawn. Presently I heard a hurried step behind me, and there was the lady, her face pale with excitement, and her eyes red with tears. "My husband has asked me to apologize to you, Mr. Marshall King," said she, standing with downcast eyes before me. "Please do not say another word, Mrs. King." Her dark eyes suddenly blazed out at me. "You fool!" she hissed, with frantic vehemence, and turning on her heel swept back to the house. The insult was so outrageous, so insufferable, that I could only stand staring after her in bewilderment. I was still there when my host joined me. He was his cheery, chubby self once more. "I hope that my wife has apologized for her foolish remarks," said he. "Oh, yes, yes, certainly." He put his hand through my arm and walked with me up and down the lawn. "You must not take it seriously," said he. "It would grieve me inexpressibly if you curtailed your visit by 1 hour. The fact is there is no reason why there should be any concealment between relatives that my poor, dear wife is incredibly jealous. She hates that anyone, male or female, should for an instant come between us. Her ideal is a desert island and an eternal tete-a-tete. That gives you the clue to her actions, which are, I confess, upon this particular point, not very far removed from mania. Tell me that you will think no more of it." "No, no, certainly not." "Then light this cigar, and come round with me and see my little menagerie." The whole afternoon was occupied by this inspection, which included all the birds, beasts, and even reptiles which he had imported. Some were free, some in cages, a few actually in the house. He spoke with enthusiasm of his successes and his failures, his births and his deaths, and he would cry out in his delight, like a schoolboy, when, as we walked, some gaudy bird would flutter up from the grass, or some curious beast slink into the cover. Finally, he led me down a corridor which extended from one wing of the house. At the end of this there was a heavy door with a sliding shutter in it, and beside it there projected from the wall an iron handle attached to a wheel and a drum. A line of stout bars extended across the passage. "I am about to show you the jewel of my collection," he said. "There is only one other specimen in Europe, now that the Rotterdam cub is dead. It is a Brazilian cat." "But how does that differ from any other cat?" "You will soon see that," said he, laughing. "Will you kindly draw that shutter and look through?" I did so, and found that I was gazing into a large empty room with stone flags and small barred windows upon the farther wall. In the center of this room, lying in the middle of a golden patch of sunlight, there was stretched a huge creature, as large as a tiger, but as black and sleek as ebony. It was simply a very enormous and very well kept black cat, and it cuddled up and basked in that yellow pool of light exactly as a cat would do. It was so graceful, so sinewy, and so gently and smoothly diabolical that I could not take my eyes from the opening. "Isn't he splendid?" said my host, enthusiastically. "Glorious! I never saw such a noble creature." "Some people call it a black puma, but really it is not a puma at all. That fellow is nearly 11 feet from tail to tip. 4 years ago he was a little ball of black fluff, with 2 yellow eyes staring out of it. He was sold me as a newborn cub, up in the wild country at the headwaters of the Rio Negro. They speared his mother to death after she had killed a dozen of them." "They are ferocious, then." "The most absolutely treacherous and bloodthirsty creatures upon earth. You talk about a Brazilian cat to an up-country Indian, and see him get the jumps. They prefer humans to game. This fellow has never tasted living blood yet, but when he does, he will be a terror. At present he won't stand anyone but me in his den. Even Baldwin, the groom, dare not go near him. As to me, I am his mother and his father in one." As he spoke, he suddenly, to my astonishment, opened the door and slipped in, closing it instantly behind him. At the sound of his voice, the huge, lithe creature rose, yawned, and rubbed its round black head affectionately against his side, while he patted and fondled it. "Now, Tommy, into your cage," said he. The monstrous cat walked over to one side of the room and coiled itself up under a grating. Everard King came out, and taking the iron handle which I have mentioned, he began to turn it. As he did so, the line of bars in the corridor began to pass through a slot in the wall and closed up the front of this grating, so as to make an effective cage. When it was in position, he opened the door once more and invited me into the room, which was heavy with the pungent, musty smell peculiar to the great carnivora. "That's how we work it," said he. "We give him the run of the room for exercise, and then at night we put him in his cage. You can let him out by turning the handle from the passage, or you can, as you have seen, coop him up the same way. No, no, you should not do that." I had put my hand between the bars to pat the glossy, heaving flank. He pulled it back, with a serious face. "I assure you that he is not safe. Don't imagine that because I can take liberties with him, any one else can. He is very exclusive in his friends. Aren't you, Tommy? Ah, he hears his lunch coming to him. Don't you, boy?" A step sounded in the stone-flagged passage, and the creature had sprung to his feet and was pacing up and down the narrow cage, his yellow eyes gleaming, and his scarlet tongue rippling and quivering over the white line of his jagged teeth. A groom entered with a coarse joint upon a tray, and thrust it through the bars to him. He pounced lightly upon it, carried it off to the corner, and there, holding it between his paws, tore and wrenched at it, raising his bloody muzzle every now and then to look at us. It was a malignant and yet fascinating sight. "You can't wonder that I am fond of him, can you?" said my host as we left the room. "Especially when you consider that I have had the rearing of him. It was no joke bringing him over from the centre of South America, but here he is safe and sound. And, as I have said, far the most perfect specimen in Europe. The people at the Zoo are dying to have him, but I really can't part with him. Now I think that I have inflicted my hobby upon you long enough, so we cannot do better than follow Tommy's example and go to our lunch." My South American relative was so engrossed by his grounds and their curious occupants that I hardly gave him credit at first for having any interests outside them. That he had some, and pressing ones, was soon borne in upon me by the number of telegrams which he received. They arrived at all hours, and were always opened by him with the utmost eagerness and anxiety upon his face. Sometimes I imagined that it must be the turf, and sometimes the Stock Exchange, but certainly he had some very urgent business going forwards which was not transacted upon the downs of Suffolk. During the 6 days of my visit he had never fewer than 3 or 4 telegrams a day, and sometimes as many as 7 or 8. I had occupied these 6 days so well that by the end of them I had succeeded in getting upon the most cordial terms with my cousin. Every night we sat up late in the billiard room, he telling me the most extraordinary stories of his adventures in America, stories so desperate and reckless that I could hardly associate them with the brown little chubby man before me. In return, I ventured upon some of my own reminiscences of London life, which interested him so much that he vowed he would come up to Grosvenor Mansions and stay with me. He was anxious to see the faster side of city life, and certainly, though I say it, he could not have chosen a more competent guide. It was not until the last day of my visit that I ventured to approach that which was on my mind. I told him frankly about my pecuniary difficulties and my impending ruin, and I asked his advice, though I hoped for something more solid. He listened attentively, puffing hard at his cigar. "But surely," said he, "you are the heir to our relative, Lord Southerton." "I have every reason to believe so, but he would never make me any allowance." "No, no, I've heard of his miserly ways. My poor Marshal, your position has been a very hard one. By the way, have you heard any news of Lord Southerton's health lately?" "He has always been in a critical condition ever since my childhood. Exactly. A creaking hinge, if ever there was one. Your inheritance may be a long way off. Dear me, how awkwardly situated you are. I had some hope, sir, that you, knowing all the facts, might be inclined to advance. Don't say another word, my dear boy, he cried with the utmost cordiality. We shall talk it over tonight, and I give you my word that whatever is in my power shall be done. I was not sorry that my visit was drawing to a close, for it is unpleasant to feel that there is one person in the house who eagerly desires your departure. Mrs. King's sallow face and forbidding eyes had become more and more hateful to me. She was no longer actively rude. Her fear of her husband prevented her. But she pushed her insane jealousy to the extent of ignoring me, never addressing me, and in every way making my stay at Greylands as uncomfortable as she could. So offensive was her manner during that last day that I should certainly have left had it not been for that interview with my host in the evening which would, I hoped, retrieve my broken fortunes. It was very late when it occurred, for my relative, who had been receiving even more telegrams than usual during the day, went off to his study after dinner, and only emerged when the household had retired to bed. I heard him go round locking the doors, as custom was of a night, and finally he joined me in the billiard room. His stout figure was wrapped in a dressing gown, and he wore a pair of red Turkish slippers without any heels. Settling down into an armchair, he brewed himself a glass of grog, in which I could not help noticing that the whiskey considerably predominated over the water. "My word," said he, "what a night!" It was, indeed. The wind was howling and screaming round the house, and the lattice windows rattled and shook as if they were coming in. The glow of the yellow lamps and the flavor of our cigars seemed the brighter and more fragrant for the contrast. "Now, my boy," said my host, "we have the house and the night to ourselves. Let me have an idea of how your affairs stand, and I will see what can be done to set them in order. I wish to hear every detail." Thus encouraged, I entered into a long exposition, in which all my tradesmen and creditors, from my landlord to my valet, figured in turn. I had notes in my pocket book, and I marshalled my facts and gave, I flatter myself, a very businesslike statement of my own unbusinesslike ways and lamentable position. I was depressed, however, to notice that my companion's eyes were vacant and his attention elsewhere. When he did occasionally throw out a remark, it was so entirely perfunctory and pointless that I was sure he had not in the least followed my remarks. Every now and then he roused himself and put on some show of interest, asking me to repeat or to explain more fully, but it was always to sink once more into the same brown study. At last he arose and threw the end of his cigar into the grate. "I'll tell you what, my boy," said he, "I never had a head for figures, so you will excuse me. You must jot it all down upon paper, and let me have a note of the amount. I'll understand it when I see it in black and white." The proposal was encouraging. I promised to do so. And now it's time we were in bed. By Jove, there's 1 o'clock striking in the hall. The tingling of the chiming clock broke through the deep roar of the gale. The wind was sweeping past with the rush of a great river. "I must see my cat before I go to bed," said my host. "A high wind excites him. Will you come?" "Certainly," said I. "Then tread softly, and don't speak, for everyone is asleep." We passed quietly down the lamp-lit Persian-rugged hall, and through the door at the farther end. All was dark in the stone corridor, but a stable lantern hung on a hook, and my host took it down and lit it. There was no grating visible in the passage, so I knew that the beast was in its cage. "Come in," said my relative, and opened the door. A deep growling as we entered showed that the storm had really excited the creature. In the flickering light of the lantern we saw it, a huge black mass, coiled in the corner of its den, and throwing a squat, uncouth shadow upon the whitewashed wall. Its tail switched angrily among the straw. "Poor Tommy is not in the best of tempers," said Everard King, holding up the lantern and looking in at him. "What a black devil he looks, doesn't he? I must give him a little supper to put him in a better humour. Would you mind holding the lantern for a moment?" I took it from his hand, and he stepped to the door. "His larder is just outside here," said he. "You will excuse me for an instant, won't you?" He passed out, and the door shut with a sharp, metallic click behind him. That hard, crisp sound made my heart stand still. A sudden wave of terror passed over me. A vague perception of some monstrous treachery turned me cold. I sprang to the door, but there was no handle upon the inner side. "Here!" I cried. "Let me out!" "All right. Don't make a row," said my host from the passage. "You've got the light all right." "Yes, but I don't care about being locked in alone like this." "Don't you? Ha ha ha! You won't be alone long." "Let me out, sir," I repeated angrily. "I tell you I don't allow practical jokes of this sort." "Practical is the word," said he, with another hateful chuckle. And then suddenly I heard, amidst the roar of the storm, the creak and whine of the winch handle turning, and the rattle of the grating as it passed through the slot. Great God, he was letting loose the Brazilian cat! In the light of the lantern I saw the bars sliding slowly before me. Already there was an opening a foot wide in the farther end. With a scream I seized the last bar with my hands, and pulled with the strength of a madman. I was a madman, with rage and horror. For a minute or more I held the thing motionless. I knew that he was straining with all his force upon the handle, and that the leverage was sure to overcome me. I gave, inch by inch, my feet sliding along the stones, and all the time I begged and prayed this inhuman monster to save me from this horrible death. I conjured him by his kinship. I reminded him that I was his guest. I begged to know what harm I had ever done him. His only answers were the tugs and jerks upon the handle, each of which, in spite of all my struggles, pulled another bar through the opening. Clinging and clutching, I was dragged across the whole front of the cage, until at last, with aching wrists and lacerated fingers, I gave up the hopeless struggle. The grating clanged back as I released it, and an instant later I heard the shuffle of the Turkish slippers in the passage and the slam of the distant door. Then everything was silent. The creature had never moved during this time. He lay still in the corner, and his tail had ceased twitching. This apparition of a man adhering to his bars, and dragged screaming across him, had apparently filled him with amazement. I saw his great eyes staring steadily at me. I had dropped the lantern when I seized the bars, but it still burned upon the floor, and I made a movement to grasp it, with some idea that its light might protect me. But the instant I moved, the beast gave a deep and menacing growl. I stopped and stood still, quivering with fear in every limb. The cat, if one may call so fearful a creature by so homely a name, was not more than 10 feet from me. The eyes glimmered like two disks of phosphorus in the darkness. They appalled and yet fascinated me. I could not take my own eyes from them. Nature plays strange tricks with us at such moments of intensity, and those glimmering lights waxed and waned with a steady rise and fall. Sometimes they seemed to be tiny points of extreme brilliancy, little electric sparks in the black obscurity. Then they would widen and widen until all that corner of the room was filled with their shifting and sinister light. And then suddenly they went out altogether. The beast had closed its eyes. I do not know whether there may be any truth in the old idea of the dominance of the human gaze, or whether the huge cat was simply drowsy, but the fact remains that, far from showing any symptom of attacking me, it simply rested its sleek black head upon its huge forepaws and seemed to sleep. I stood, fearing to move lest I should rouse it into malignant life once more. But at least I was able to think clearly now that the baleful eyes were off me. Here I was shut up for the night with the ferocious beast. My own instincts, to say nothing of the words of the plausible villain who laid this trap for me, warned me that the animal was as savage as its master. How could I stave it off until morning? The door was hopeless, and so were the narrow, barred windows. There was no shelter anywhere in the bare, stone-flagged room. To cry for assistance was absurd. I knew that this den was an outhouse, and that the corridor which connected it with the house was at least 100 feet long. Besides, with the gale thundering outside, my cries were not likely to be heard. I had only my own courage and my own wits to trust to. And then, with a fresh wave of horror, my eyes fell upon the lantern. The candle had burned low, and was already beginning to gutter. In 10 minutes it would be out. I had only 10 minutes then in which to do something, for I felt that if I were once left in the dark with that fearful beast I should be incapable of action. The very thought of it paralyzed me. I cast my despairing eyes round this chamber of death, and they rested upon one spot which seemed to promise, I will not say safety, but less immediate and imminent danger than the open floor. I have said that the cage had a top as well as a front, and this top was left standing when the front was wound through the slot in the wall. It consisted of bars at a few inches interval, with stout wire netting between, and it rested upon a strong stanchion at each end. It stood now as a great barred canopy over the crouching figure in the corner. The space between this iron shelf and the roof may have been from 2 or 3 feet. If I could only get up there, squeezed in between bars and ceiling, I should have only one vulnerable side. I should be safe from below, from behind, and from each side. Only on the open face of it could I be attacked. There, it is true, I had no protection whatever, but at least I should be out of the brute's path when he began to pace about his den. He would have to come out of his way to reach me. It was now or never, for if once the light were out it would be impossible. With a gulp in my throat I sprang up, seized the iron edge of the top, and swung myself panting onto it. I writhed in, face downwards, and found myself looking straight into the terrible eyes and yawning jaws of the cat. Its fetid breath came up into my face like the steam from some foul pot. It appeared, however, to be rather curious than angry. With a sleek ripple of its long, black back, it rose, stretched itself, and then rearing itself on its hind legs, with one forepaw against the wall, it raised the other, and drew its claws across the wire meshes beneath me. One sharp white hook tore through my trousers, for I may mention that I was still in evening dress, and dug a furrow in my knee. It was not meant as an attack, but rather as an experiment, for upon my giving a sharp cry of pain he dropped down again, and springing lightly into the room he began walking swiftly around it, looking up every now and again in my direction. For my part, I was shuffled backwards until I lay with my back against the wall, screwing myself into the smallest space possible. The farther I got, the more difficult it was for him to attack me. He seemed more excited now that he had begun to move about. and he ran swiftly and noiselessly round and round the den, passing continually underneath the iron couch upon which I lay. It was wonderful to see so great a bulk passing like a shadow, with hardly the softest thudding of velvety pads. The candle was burning low, so low that I could hardly see the creature. And then, with the last flare and splutter, it went out altogether. I was alone with the cat in the dark. It helps one to face a danger when one knows that one has done all that possibly can be done. There is nothing for it then but to quietly await the result. In this case there was no chance of safety anywhere except the precise spot where I was. I stretched myself out, therefore, and lay silently, almost breathlessly, hoping that the beast might forget my presence if I did nothing to remind him. I reckoned that it must already be 2 o'clock. At 4 it would be full dawn. I had not more than 2 hours to wait for daylight. Outside the storm was still raging, and the rain lashed continually against the little windows. Inside, the poisonous and fetid air was overpowering. I could neither hear nor see the cat. I tried to think about other things, but only one had power enough to draw my mind from my terrible position. That was the contemplation of my cousin's villainy, his unparalleled hypocrisy, his malignant hatred of me. Beneath that cheerful face there lurked the spirit of a medieval assassin. And as I thought of it, I saw more clearly how cunningly the thing had been arranged. He had apparently gone to bed with the others. No doubt he had his witness to prove it. Then, unknown to them, he had slipped down, had lured me into his den and abandoned me. His story would be so simple. He had left me to finish my cigar in the billiard room. I had gone down on my own account to have a last look at the cat. I had entered the room without observing that the cage was opened, and I had been caught. How could such a crime be brought home to him? Suspicion, perhaps, but proof, never. How slowly those dreadful 2 hours went by. Once I heard a low, rasping sound, which I took to be the creature licking its own fur. Several times those greenish eyes gleamed at me through the darkness, but never in a fixed stare, and my hopes grew stronger that my presence had been forgotten or ignored. At last the least faint glimmer of light came through the windows. I first dimly saw them as two gray squares upon the black wall. Then gray turned to white, and I could see my terrible companion once more. And he, alas, could see me. It was evident to me at once that he was in a much more dangerous and aggressive mood than when I had seen him last. The cold of the morning had irritated him, and he was hungry as well. With a continual growl, he paced swiftly up and down the side of the room which was farthest from my refuge, his whiskers bristling angrily and his tail switching and lashing. As he turned at the corners, his savage eyes always looked upwards at me with a dreadful menace. I knew then that he meant to kill me. Yet I found myself even at that moment admiring the sinuous grace of the devilish thing, its long, undulated, rippling movements, the gloss of its beautiful flanks, the vivid, palpitating scarlet of the glistening tongue which hung from the jet-black muzzle. And all the time that deep, threatening growl was rising and rising in an unbroken crescendo. I knew that the crisis was at hand. It was a miserable hour to meet such a death. So cold, so comfortless, shivering in my light dress clothes upon this gridiron of torment upon which I was stretched. I tried to brace myself to it, to raise my soul above it, and at the same time, with the lucidity which comes to a perfectly desperate man, I cast round for some possible means of escape. One thing was clear to me. If that front of the cage was only back in its position once more, I could find a sure refuge behind it. Could I possibly pull it back? I hardly dared to move for fear of bringing the creature upon me. Slowly, very slowly, I put my hand forward until it grasped the edge of the front, the final bar which protruded through the wall. To my surprise it came quite easily to my jerk. Of course, the difficulty of drawing it out arose from the fact that I was clinging to it. I pulled again, and 3 inches of it came through. It ran apparently on wheels. I pulled again, and then the cat sprang. It was so quick, so sudden, that I never saw it happen. I simply heard the savage snarl, and in an instant afterwards the blazing yellow eyes, the flattened black head with its red tongue and flashing teeth were within reach of me. The impact of the creature shook the bars upon which I lay, until I thought, as far as I could think of anything at such a moment, that they were coming down. The cat swayed there for an instant, the head and front paws quite close to me, the hind paws clawing to find a grip upon the edge of the grating. I heard the claws rasping as they clung to the wire netting, and the breath of the beast made me sick. But its bound had been miscalculated. It could not retain its position. Slowly, grinning with rage and scratching madly at the bars, it swung backwards and dropped heavily upon the floor. With a growl, it instantly faced round to me and crouched for another spring. I knew that the next few moments would decide my fate. The creature had learned by experience it would not miscalculate again. I must act promptly, fearlessly, if I were to have a chance for life. In an instant I had formed my plan. Pulling off my dress coat, I threw it down over the head of the beast. At the same moment I dropped over the edge, seized the end of the front grating, and pulled it frantically out of the wall. It came more easily than I could have expected. I rushed across the room, bearing it with me, but, as I rushed, the accident of my position put me on the outer side. Had it been the other way, I might have come off scatheless. As it was, there was a moment's pause as I stopped it, and tried to pass in through the opening which I had left. That moment was enough to give time to the creature to toss off the coat with which I had blinded him, and to spring upon me. I hurled myself through the gap, and pulled the rails to behind me, but he seized my leg before I could entirely withdraw it. One stroke of that huge paw tore off my calf as a shaving of wood curls off before a plane. The next moment, bleeding and fainting, I was lying among the foul straw, with a line of friendly bars between me and the creature which ramped so frantically against them. Too wounded to move, and too faint to be conscious of fear, I could only lie, more dead than alive, and watch it. It pressed its broad black chest against the bars, and angled for me with its crooked paws, as I have seen a kitten do before a mousetrap. It ripped my clothes, but, stretch as it would, it could not quite reach me. I have heard of the curious numbing effect produced by wounds from the great carnivora, and now I was destined to experience it, for I had lost all sense of personality, and was as interested in the cat's failure or success as if it were some game which I was watching. And then gradually my mind drifted away into strange, vague dreams, always with that black face and red tongue coming back into them, and so I lost myself in the nirvana of delirium, the blessed relief of those who are too sorely tried. Tracing the course of events afterwards, I conclude that I must have been insensible for about 2 hours. What roused me to consciousness once more was that sharp metallic click which had been the precursor of my terrible experience. It was the shooting back of the spring lock. Then, before my senses were clear enough to entirely apprehend what they saw, I was aware of the round, benevolent face of my cousin peering in through the open door. What he saw evidently amazed him. There was the cat crouching on the floor. I was stretched upon my back in my shirt sleeves within the cage, my trousers torn to ribbons, and a great pool of blood all round me. I can see his amazed face now, with the morning sunlight upon it. He peered at me, and peered again. Then he closed the door behind him, and advanced to the cage to see if I were really dead. I cannot undertake to say what happened. I was not in a fit state to witness or to chronicle such events. I can only say that I was suddenly conscious that his face was away from me, that he was looking towards the animal. "Good old Tommy!" he cried. "Good old Tommy!" Then he came near the bars, with his back still towards me. "Down, you stupid beast!" he roared. "Down, sir! Don't you know your master?" Suddenly, even in my bemuddled brain, a remembrance came of those words of his when he had said that the taste of blood would turn the cat into a fiend. My blood had done it, but he was to pay the price. "Get away!" he screamed. "Get away, you devil! Baldwin! Baldwin! Oh, my God!" And then I heard him fall, and rise, and fall again, with a sound like the ripping of sacking. His screams grew fainter until they were lost in the worrying snarl. And then, after I thought that he was dead, I saw, as in a nightmare, a blinded, tattered, blood-soaked figure running wildly round the room, and that was the last glimpse which I had of him before I fainted once again. I was many months in my recovery. In fact, I cannot say that I have ever recovered, for to the end of my days I shall carry a stick as a sign of my night with the Brazilian cat. Baldwin, the groom, and the other servants could not tell what had occurred when, drawn by the death cries of their master, they found me behind the bars, and his remains, or what they afterwards discovered to be his remains, in the clutch of the creature which he had reared. They stalled him off with hot irons, and afterwards shot him through the loophole of the door, before they could finally extricate me. I was carried to my bedroom, and there, under the roof of my would-be murderer, I remained between life and death for several weeks. They had sent for a surgeon from Clipton and a nurse from London, and in a month I was able to be carried to the station, and so conveyed back once more to Grosvenor Mansions. I have one remembrance of that illness, which might have been part of the ever-changing panorama conjured up by a delirious brain, were it not so definitely fixed in my memory. One night, when the nurse was absent, the door of my chamber opened, and a tall woman in blackest mourning slipped into the room. She came across to me, and as she bent her sallow face, I saw by the faint gleam of the night light that it was the Brazilian woman whom my cousin had married. She stared intently into my face, and her expression was more kindly than I had ever seen it. "Are you conscious?" she asked. I feebly nodded, for I was still very weak. "Well, then, I only wish to say to you that you have yourself to blame. Did I not do all I could for you? From the beginning I tried to drive you from the house. By every means short of betraying my husband, I tried to save you from him. I knew that he had a reason for bringing you here. I knew that he would never let you get away from him. No one knew him as I knew him, who had suffered from him so long. I did not dare to tell you all this. He would have killed me. But I did my best for you. As things have turned out, you have been the best friend that I have ever had. You have set me free, and I fancied that nothing but death would do that. I am sorry if you are hurt, but I cannot reproach myself. I told you that you were a fool, and a fool you have been." She crept out of the room, the bitter, singular woman, and I was never destined to see her again. With what remained from her husband's property she went back to her native land, and I have heard that she afterwards took the veil at Pernambuco. It was not until I had been back in London for some time that the doctors pronounced me to be well enough to do business. It was not a very welcome permission to me, for I feared that it would be the signal for an inrush of creditors, but it was Summers, my lawyer, who first took advantage of it. "I am very glad to see that your lordship is doing much better," he said. "I have been waiting a long time to offer my congratulations." "What do you mean, Summers? This is no time for joking." "I mean what I say," he answered. "You have been Lord Southerton for the last 2 weeks, but we feared that it would retard your recovery if you were to learn it." Lord Southerton? One of the richest peers in England? I could not believe my ears. And then, suddenly, I thought of the time which had elapsed, and how it coincided with my injuries. "Then Lord Southerton must have died about the same time that I was hurt." "His death occurred upon that very day." Summers looked hard at me as I spoke, and I am convinced, for he was a very shrewd fellow, that he had guessed the true state of the case. He paused for a moment as if awaiting a confidence from me, but I could not see what was to be gained by exposing such a family scandal. "Yes, a very curious coincidence," he continued, with the same knowing look. "Of course, you are aware that your cousin Everard King was the next heir to the estates. Now, if it had been you instead of him who had been torn to pieces by this tiger, or whatever it was, then of course he would have been Lord Southerton at the present moment." "No doubt," said I. "And he took such an interest in it," said Summers. "I happen to know that the late Lord Southerton's valet was in his pay, and that he used to have telegrams from him every few hours to tell him how he was getting on. That would be about the time when you were down there. Was it not strange that he should wish to be so well informed, since he knew that he was not the direct heir?" "Very strange," said I. "And now, Summers, if you will bring me my bills and a new cheque book, we will begin to get things into order." End of The Brazilian Cat by Arthur Conan Doyle.
Thank you for joining me on this Brazilian adventure. If you enjoyed exploring Brazil with me, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe to Lost in Brazil for more exciting content and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Share your thoughts and questions or suggestions in the comments below. I love hearing from you. And until next time, obrigado and safe travels.